Yeah, that seems to be working, thank you. Hi everyone, so as Dot mentioned, my name's Erin Pearson-Wilbury and I'm a senior editor here at AM. I've been managing our Africa and the New Imperialism collection, which we are hoping to publish later this month. This project focuses on the period of rapid European colonial and imperialist expansion across the African continent during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. What makes this such an interesting time period is just the sheer amount of change and shifting power dynamics that happens over a huge geographical area in such a short amount of time. The dates that we're focusing on with this resource are around 1870 to about 1914. So in roughly 40 years, the continent goes from being around 10% controlled by or influenced by European powers to about 90% controlled by or colonized by, or in massive scare quotes, claimed by European powers. So there's a huge cultural, social, and political shift within this time period. We've worked with 11 archives to produce this resource, and they're situated across the UK, the US, and France in order to present collections from key individuals or covering key events for those different powers that were active across Africa. And then in terms of our key themes, the material within this resource can be used to study or research a wide range of different themes, from really broad themes like imperialism in the 19th century to the experience of women under imperialism, to the establishment of infrastructure like the building of railways and other transport links. I'd also like to highlight the contextual features within this collection. We've created an interactive map feature which illustrates these different powers at play across the 1870 to 1914 time period. It can be really difficult, especially for students or people coming to this area of study for the first time, to visualize these vast changes. And so we believe that having a visual representation of this across the time period can really help convey these huge changes and shifts in power dynamics. We also have a number of different guides to the material as kind of entry points into the content, and we've commissioned a number of academic essays, and a lot of these seek to address the gaps and silences present with material like this, which is widely from colonial perspectives. Some of the topics of the essays cover the creation of the state of Nigeria and its colonial and economic history, which is a fascinating case study on statecraft and the ongoing impacts of colonialism. Colonial violence in the archives, which covers, amongst other things, recognizing colonial violence in archival materials and reading for African experiences in archival materials as well. We have an essay on resistance to colonial rule, looking at both passive and active resistance, and again, how to read for this within archival documents, and using maps and cartography in the study of Africa's history, including the problems and biases that are present within historical maps. In terms of some of the collections that are presented within the resource, a lot of these collections are the papers and collections of key individuals and figures, and these are generally speaking European diplomats, explorers, missionaries, and figures who were active within the region at this time. So because this resource focuses on the history of colonization, these are really essential collections to include. There are a number of key individuals whose collections and papers we have, and some of them are listed here. We have the papers of David Livingstone, Charles Gordon, Frederick Lugard, Flora Shaw. We also have papers related to Roger Casement, Joseph Chamberlain, as well as Henry Morton Stanley and King Leopold II of Belgium. And these papers of individuals show their involvement in the colonialist establishment and expansion, and they're really essential for the study of this time period. All of that being said, though, although the named collections are, a lot of the named collections are the papers of European, generally men in power, such as diplomats, explorers, royalty, etc. And while the material included within those collections is essential for the study of specifically of European involvement within the African continent in this particular time period, these aren't the only narratives that are present. There are accounts and narratives from an African perspective or a non-European perspective. They do exist and are accessible within the material, but they are often through a European lens. And so we need to be mindful of this and contextualize it properly, which is what we've tried to do with our contextual pieces. So I'd highly recommend looking at our essays to support reading against the grain, but I wanted to also just highlight a couple of narratives of people who are not European diplomats or dignitaries. So on the left we have a letter from some correspondence from King Khama III to Joseph Chamberlain. King Khama was a chief of the Bangwato people, and he did speak and write in English, and he later lived in England. But this specific letter was translated into English by an English person. And so while we have this letter from King Khama, there will be translation bias that exists within it. The second image is of Queen Ranavalona III of Madagascar. This is from a document from the British Library. It is a printed volume and it provides a history of Madagascar. It was written by a British woman who was a missionary. And so within this document, there are the accounts of 3 Madagascan queens, Ranavalona I, II, and III. And these women were the last sovereign rulers of Madagascar, and they resisted colonialism and Christianity until Ranavalona III eventually relented and publicly claimed herself as Christian. So again, this account is really interesting, but of course, there will be biases that are present because it's written from the perspective of a Christian woman who was a missionary. The third account is from a handful of letters that we have from Tipitip, who was a slave trader and became Leopold II's kind of right-hand man within the Congo. He employed a lot of really brutal tactics when he was involved in the slave trade. And this letter from Tipitip is him discussing meetings that he's had with English, Belgian, and German diplomats. And it sounds quite disparaging, but again, the letter itself sounds quite disparaging, but again, it's been translated into English by someone other than Tipitip. So while we must always be mindful that the content is usually from a European perspective, there are narratives from a non-European perspective that are available, but we just always have to be careful about questioning our biases, and we've been quite keen to support students in doing so with our contextual pieces. So that's everything on Africa and the New Imperialism, but I'm very happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.